First, let me welcome everyone. My name is Nick Konzak, and I'm excited and delighted to be co-hosting today's session, Seeking Ikigai, from Successful to Thriving Through Purpose, with my partner for today's session, Carmita Semaan1, who is the founder and CEO of the Surge Institute. And I am part of Snap Inc. in an HR leader role. And this is a collaboration between Fred Leadership and the Surge Institute. And so for those of you who are new to Fred Leadership, Fred stands for the Future of Executive Development. And our mission is to connect and inspire those who exemplify and cultivate ethical, inclusive, and transformational leadership. And it was a great opportunity to collaborate with Carmita and the Surge Institute. And our missions really overlap quite a bit here. And Surge is really transforming the social sector by training, supporting, and connecting and elevating education leaders of color. So Carmita, I'll turn over to you for a quick introduction, and I'm so happy to be co-presenting with you today.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. I want to say good morning, good day, wherever you are in the world, to everyone. I so appreciate being able to be in this community. Nick introduced me to Joe and Fred during the pandemic. I think it was right at the early stages. And I had never heard of Fred. I'd never heard of this community. And I think it is brilliant that there does exist this space that is focused specifically on executive development and doing not just development for development's sake, but this notion of exemplifying ethical and inclusive and transformational leadership. Anyone who knows me and knows the work that we do at Surge, we say that we frankly don't groom leaders, we don't develop leaders. We believe that people are born intrinsically with the skills and the genius and brilliance that they need. We often just need to provide space for additional skill development, but also coming back to oneself. So what I hope that we'll do today is an opportunity to just talk a bit about that journey, my personal journey, what we've seen through the work that we do at Surge, and hopefully support you all in your journey to thrive so that you can support others in doing the same.
That's great, Carmita, and thank you for the quick intro. And today's session will be really more of a fireside chat sort of format. So we aren't going to be doing a lot of presenting of slides. We have a couple slides that we'll refer to throughout the presentation today, but it really won't be a presentation. It'll be more of a conversation with Carmita and myself, and we hope you like the format and welcome your feedback. I would like to share first a quick anecdote about when I first met Carmita. Gosh, it's probably 7-8 years ago now. And her energy and enthusiasm for not only life, but the people around her were really infectious. And also, fun fact, she gave me the tip about Blade and Bow bourbon, which is still one of my favorite bourbons today. So I just wanted to share a little bit of personal experience when I first met Carmita and some of the tips that she gave me. So
I am passionate about many things, including bourbon.
All right. So just a few things to kick off. We really believe that in our field of developing and elevating others, that supporting and informing your practice really requires you to take some time for you to develop you. So really today is all about you. And if we think that it's pretty difficult to focus on developing others if we don't have the time and the space to have some development for ourselves. So we'd invite you today to really use this session to pour into yourself and reflect on your own journey and your own professional development. And hopefully there are some nuggets that you can take not only for your practice of developing others and supporting others, but also for yourself. And so we welcome you to do that throughout the session today. I'd also like to thank Joe, Julie, and Victoria for your help in organizing and planning the session. Thank you so much. And we're gonna, without further ado, we're just gonna dive in. So this concept of Ikigai, Carmita, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you tell me about how you came across this concept and how did you learn about it? And how have you really started to find it useful in supporting not only yourself, but also the people around you? you give a little background there?
Absolutely. Before I start with that definition, I do just want to underscore something that you said, Nick, for this audience. I often say, like, we can't lead other people to their breakthrough from our places of brokenness, right? So if we aren't actually doing the work that we aspire to have other folks to do, it's pretty difficult for us to do that and do it well. So I just want to applaud everyone for investing in yourself in this time, and hope that you continue to do so, because you're in this field because you believe in supporting, uplifting, amplifying others, but just don't leave yourself off the list is what I would ask. So just want to underscore that, Nick. Ikigai. So here's real talk. I mean, you all will find that I'm real talk all the time. And so you'll probably learn more about me than you want to know, but too bad. Here it is. So I was introduced to this concept at a time it was about 12 years ago. I was a new CEO of a nonprofit organization in Chicago, and on the surface, doing extremely well. To be, CEO of a national nonprofit in my 30s, raising a ton of money, helping to expand our work across the country. Everything looked great, right? But there was such an emptiness that I was feeling at that time that I didn't feel comfortable even talking about, because no one wants to, hear you whine and complain when your life seems to be going so great, right? I had done all the things. I had gotten an MBA from Kellogg. I have an undergrad in chemical engineering. I had gone from I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up well below the poverty line. I spent a childhood in housing projects and homeless, and to go, and I often say that I am where I am because of that, not in spite of it. So much about what I've learned about leadership, about heart, about hustle, was on, the streets of Birmingham, Alabama, and in Smithfield housing projects. But to be at a place where I was at that time, I could not pinpoint why I didn't feel the success that the world was telling me that I should. And something that the world did not see is, though I was in this role and had achieved what many see as like the epitome of success, it felt hollow. I did not feel fulfilled in my work. I was in a marriage that was going horribly, and I'm now in a great marriage. So Nick knows my husband, so don't go tell. George he hates to hear that he's my second husband. He says we can stop counting now. He is the last one. But at the time, I was very much suffering. So I started to invest in myself and just do a lot of healing work, everything from therapy to executive coaching and all these sorts of things. And it was, frankly, a therapist that introduced me to Ikigai, which the literal translation is reason for living. And this idea that, all of us, if you, believe this, that there is a reason that we are here. There is a reason for all of us. We are all uniquely made with our own strengths, our own talents, our own desires, our own curiosities. And behind this word, there was also a framework. And the framework was what really hooked me. So on this next slide, you'll see Ikigai sits at the center of what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And there was something that just sort of blew my mind about this framework, because it allowed me the space to articulate why things had felt like didn't feel aligned, and I realized that there were times where I was leaning so heavily into what I was good at and what I could be paid for, that I was so far away from what I loved. And therefore I was doing well in a vocation, but I wasn't finding purpose in that work. So this is a journey. I often say to folks that Ikigai and purpose, I don't believe is a destination, because if you think about these things, a number of these variables change over time. So what the world needed 10 years ago is different than what the world needs today, right? To talk a bit about Surge and our work. So in 2012, when I discovered Ikigai, I quit my job as CEO. I did not have a backup job. I do not recommend that to anyone else, but I was at a point where I realized that I needed to live a life that was aligned, and I did not feel aligned. I felt like I could do the work, I was doing it well, those sorts of things, but that I wasn't aligned. At the time, I wrote a concept paper, which became the concept paper for Surge. And if you can take yourself back to sort of 2012, this was at a time in the country, in the US, where President Obama and then Secretary Arne Duncan were often talking about education in our country as the civil rights issue of our time. And I wrote this concept paper that started out, this will tell you something about my boldness, and it said, we can't keep talking about education as the civil rights issue of this generation without acknowledging that those suffering the injustice are not leading the movement. And that became the concept paper for Surge, because my response and my answer to that was to say that we actually need to unapologetically invest in leaders that are of the communities, that need to have the issues of education, equity, access, and opportunity addressed. And if we look at any successful social justice movement of the past, anything from women's suffrage to civil rights, like those folks who were leading those movements were of those communities. And that has not been the case in education. So in 2012, when I talked about unapologetically investing in leadership for Black and Brown folks to get people to senior and executive level roles, to transform, disrupt, upend systems, today in 2022, that does not seem startling. In 2012, I will tell you, I got a lot of doors slammed in my face for saying that directly. The reason I'm sharing that right now is because there was something in me, and Surge has been wildly successful. We've gone from an organization that started in Chicago officially in 2014 with a budget of what I could pull together on my credit cards and all those sorts of things, to now being almost $6 million organization with programming across the US in 6 different states and cities, and lots of other things that I could talk about. What I'm most proud of is our 300 alums are impacting 3.4 million students across the country, which is really powerful. And to have built that from my dining room table is something I'm really proud of. But it is aligned with this notion of really seeking purpose. And at that time, I had no idea that we would fast forward to a time when in 2020, we faced a racial reckoning that allowed people to really start thinking about the importance and the significance of racial equity, not only in this country, but across the globe. And so I share all that to say that I happen to find this nexus of what I believe the world needed before, frankly, I think the world knew that it needed it, what I love and who I love, the things and skills that I bring, and what ultimately we could be paid for. And for me, that was and is a continued journey. And it's one that really underscores the work that we do in Surge. We, in our development work, are not trying to lay out a blueprint for these are the right buttons that you need to push and check in order to get to, fill in the blank role, C-suite, whatever. It's like part of that journey has to be about you focusing inward and understanding what brings you joy, what you do extremely well, what talent, strengths, and gifts you have, and what are the problems that you want to solve, and how do you actually leverage your strengths, gifts in order to do that. And I think that that's a really important set of questions for us all to be thinking about for those that we support.
Yeah, Carmita, thank you. I appreciate the level of vulnerability about, sharing really from early days, like how those early days shaped who you are and how you approached these very large decisions in your life. And I'm curious, it sounds like there was a pretty defining moment when you realize, like, hey, I'm in a profession today, but I need the more of the mission side of that Ikigai framework. That takes a lot of courage to do what you did. So was there—
Or crazy.
maybe a little crazy, yeah, but courage and crazy. How did you, was there something that pushed you over that edge into that courageous decision to say, hey, I'm gonna quit. This is something that I'm really passionate about. You did have, it sounds like, your concept paper at some point, but like, what was it that pushed you over the edge to make that really courageous decision?
There were three things. One of them, I had a conversation with an executive coach. She's still my executive coach today. And like, most folks who are joining us today, I had been very successful. I had checked all the boxes. I had done well in school. I did all the things, I often would describe myself as this insecure overachiever, right? Like I work really hard. I, knew all the things to do. And I had this session with an executive coach, and we were going through a set of 360 feedback. I know many of you have done that. And I came very prepared, or I thought I was very prepared for my session to talk about my opportunity areas and my faults and the things that I needed to get better at. And she said, well, let's talk about your strengths first. And I said, well, why? I don't need to talk about that. Like, that's great. I read it. But what I really want to talk about is these things I need to get better at. And she said, okay. So, we did that for a session. And by the third session, Nick, she said to me something that really changed my life. She said, I've listened to you now for 2 sessions. And at first I thought this was humility. Like, I thought that what I was experiencing from you was humility. But I now need to tell you something, which is you are uncomfortable talking about your strengths because you don't actually believe you have them. And until you believe it, you will be your greatest impediment to the life that you wish to lead. Mic drop. It was the most emotional and like kind of crazy moment, because for someone who had done all the right things, checked all the right boxes, been done well in school, had this great professional trajectory, for someone to see me so fully and in such a raw way and say to me, like, you don't actually believe you are as good as the world sees you. And the reason I'm sharing that, Nick, is because if I had not done that work, if you look at the framework for Ikigai, there's a whole lot of work that goes behind being able to answer those questions. So, and you all know, many of you, most of you are leading others and supporting and investing in others, and asking a question like, well, what are your strengths or what are your talents? Most people can rattle off what other people have told them, right? Like they can say, oh, I'm great at spreadsheets. I'm great at data analysis. But when you actually ask them, what are you uniquely good at that makes you good at Excel? Like, what is it that you were born doing very well that actually makes solving difficult problems relatively easier for you than other folks? Those are really hard questions for lots of people to answer. And that was the first thing that was a necessary precursor for me, Nick, of me doing my own work to lean into my strengths and not just knowing them, but really believing them. I mentioned earlier, like, I'm a chemical engineer, right? One of the former life, I was a chemical engineer. It's one thing to know, to memorize things, right? It's one thing to memorize the periodic table, but that doesn't actually help you as an engineer. You have to know it, right? Like, you actually have to know what's behind, like, why those elements are where they are on the table. And I think of this in the same way. And so that was the number one thing that I had to do, is to really believe myself to be as good as the world saw me, so that I had the courage to lean out and do something completely crazy. I mean, I told you a bit about my personal story. You don't go from someone who grew up in the projects to quitting a job as a CEO without having a job. Like, I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have, a financial fallback plan. But I did just have this courage that the problem that I wanted to solve was something that was so necessary. And I believed that I had the skills to do it. The second thing for me was, I call it my tribe. I had a group of people around me who believed in my vision and were willing to invest their time, talent, treasure, whatever it was, to help me realize this. And the reason that I think it's important to share that is lots of folks share stories of entrepreneurship that seem like an individual superhero story. And most of that is BS, right? Like, most of us don't do this work as individual superheroes. There's a Justice League. I'm a comic nerd, and obviously DC comics are the best. So there's a Justice League, not Avengers. The Avengers have the better movies, I will say that, but DC are the better comics. But there was a Justice League of folks that helped what was that idea on the page become a reality. And we still at Surge have an amazing Justice League of team members. And so for me, it was, that was the second part of this. It was like recognizing that, yes, I've got strengths, I've got things that are going to help take this concept and build this concept into an institution and a movement, but I can't do it alone. And I've got to actually surround myself with people who are better than me at things to help move this forward. So that was the second thing. And the third thing is, there is this sort of spirit of continuous improvement. I often say, like, people ask me, well, I talk about liberation a lot, and people say, like, what does liberation like really mean to you? And I often say it's the freedom to fail without it being fatal, right? Like, and it was important to me, particularly starting a new journey, to expect to experience failure and to know that that wasn't fatal. Because oftentimes, if we don't set ourselves up, and I'm going to say this specifically women, specifically folks of color, the world will tell us that our failures are fatal, that we don't have the space to actually have a setback and get back up. And the truth of the matter is that could not be further from the truth. So those are the three things that were important for me to know, recognize, and lean into, to go from this moment of, what in the world am I doing with my life, even though I seem to be successful, to really thriving in a way that felt so aligned, and having like my daily work be aligned with what I believe my life's purpose is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just share. I think it's a really inspirational journey, and thank you for sharing. And I did also want to share in the chat, Michael had shared a couple comments, and this was a bit ago, but he said, it sounds like imposter syndrome, which I can relate to, makes sense if you think about it, as it's hard to get a qualification in being innovative. So just wanted to share that with you, Carmita, and then also in the group. And he also said, I think this was in reference to your Justice League comment. Can't agree there, but I'll accept the concession, already the films.
Yeah, I'm showing my age a little bit with the DC comics. I'm still quite a comic nerd. I read graphic novels all the time. I think that there's like people, we don't talk enough about the things that bring us joy. And in part of my mindfulness practice, I think we also should have things that are playful in our lives. And so graphic novels are one of those things for me. I love disappearing into the world of fantasy and the unknown. So yeah.
Awesome. And yeah, thank you, Michael, for your comments. I invite anyone else to feel free to either raise your hand using that feature in Zoom, or add in any additional comments or questions in the chat. Now, Carmita, I do want to, you've shared a little bit, well, quite a lot of inspiring moments around how you used Ikigai in your life, and that powerful moment with your executive coach, which those are, I wrote down, taking some notes, I wrote down like, wow, powerful and jarring statements from your executive coach that really had an impact on you. But I'm also curious now to kind of move from how you've used that concept, but then how do you find it useful in using that concept with others around you, whether it's part of your work at the Surge Institute or beyond the Surge Institute? How do you now use that concept with others, and how have you found that useful?
Yeah, thanks. So some of this has really has been part of the underpinning for some of our programmatic framework for Surge, as an example. So one thing that we do with all of our Surge fellows is, and Nick, you know this, that I'm a StrengthsFinder coach. I've been, trained through Gallup, and I believe StrengthsFinder is one tool. There are lots of them, but it is an amazing tool to use to actually sort of force people into this notion of like naming, claiming, and then aiming their talents and strengths in both their personal and professional lives. So StrengthsFinder, because frankly, that was such a critical and pivotal moment for me in my own journey. It's one of the reasons why, though we have other people who have built out the scope and sequence of our programming, but that was one of the things as my sort of founder influence that I was like, we got to have this. And it's been amazing. I mean, our programming, I talk about our Surge's programming as being a combination of head, heart, and spirit. So on the head side, you've got executive skills stuff that you would expect. You've got negotiations, you've got strategic planning, you've got, those sorts of heady finance operations, you've got those kind of heady skills. On the heart side, you've got more of your interpersonal work, right? Like here's the work that we do in teams, leading teams, like influencing, all those sorts of things. But on the spirit side, one of our leading principles for Surge is focusing inward, because in the work, particularly in the social sector, in urban education, if you don't understand who you are, whose you are, and who you are there to serve, you will not be able to do your work effectively, sustainably for yourself or for your community. So all of those things are informed by, frankly, some of that journey that I went on. But what's been powerful, Nick, is in this head, heart, and spirit sort of approach to our work, we have people who go through our fellowship, and one of the most powerful moments, I remember this like it was yesterday, 2015, one of our inaugural fellows sort of pulled me to the side after one of our sessions, and he said, Carmita, I need to tell you that I came into this and committed to this fellowship program, and I was thinking about being promoted. I was thinking about getting what I needed for promotion. And he said, now I'm thinking about what problems I want to solve and like how I want to leave my community better than I found it. And that gives me chills today just thinking about it, because what I realize is by being so thoughtful about this connection of head, heart, and spirit in our work, we have created a space that is transformational, not just professionally, but personally for folks. Like we have, and that's something that I'm really proud of. And I think I could rattle off lots of things that we do intentionally in terms of, different programmatic elements. But I think high level, I will say that creating an experience that is transformational has been very much grounded in the necessity of showing a mirror, of being a mirror for folks, so that they can see themselves fully and wholly in order to bring that to their work.
I mean, it's fascinating. As you shared that, Carmita, I thought about how you talked about focusing inward. And in this case, this actually resulted in an external focus in moving from like, okay, this is the promotion that I want, which is inwardly focused, to here's the problems that I want to solve. But like that inward focus actually has an externally focused outcome. So that's super interesting in that example. Thank you. And Michael, I see another chat. Thank you. A new insight will always lead to a reframing of our worldview, which will invite a course correction, no matter how subtle. Yeah. Thank you. Carmita, any quick reactions to that, or would you like to elaborate?
I would just double click and say, absolutely. Amen, Michael.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. And clearly, Carmita, you've gone through kind of this journey and process of applying Ikigai in your own life, but you've now translated that actually to your mission, your personal and company mission, to create that environment for others to thrive. And I'm curious, like, if others are on this call, or we support other people who are considering a shift like this, or making a transformational movement in how they think about their purpose and what that means in their life, what tips would you give them? Because I would imagine, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. I think that's the saying, right? I'm sure there are some bumps along the way, but I'm just curious, like, what somebody who's gone through this and really translated this into the mission for your life at a much broader and systemic level. You're setting the bar pretty high, but there probably are bumps along the way. So what lessons learned would you like to share?
Yeah, there's so many, but I will frame this and think about, the fact that most of the folks here in this audience are supporting, investing in, developing others. So I'll frame this around, I think, some lessons learned and things in supporting and investing in others. I think, one, encouraging people, and I've said this, implicitly in a few different statements that I've made, but I'll just say it explicitly here. Encouraging people to write their own scorecard. And what I mean by that is, like, we often are sort of going through life checking boxes on a scorecard that is not of our own creation, right? We are checking the box, whatever. Like for me, it was, I got to get, and I chose chemical engineering. Yes, I love chemistry and I was very good in math and science. But the truth of the matter is, when you grow up poor, you want to choose a career where you can make some money, right? So for me, it was like, okay, I got to get an undergraduate degree that will ensure that I always have a job. I've got it. Like, I had all of these sort of scorecard things. And it took me getting to my, mid 30s before I sort of sat back and said, like, whose game am I playing here, right? Like, is this mine, or is this one, and so I would say one of the first things that we should do in support of others is actually give them the space, resources, tools, and support to reframe and rewrite their scorecard, and whatever that means for them. That could be both personally and professionally. And that's something that I would absolutely start with, and just say that explicitly, because you would be surprised by like giving people the freedom to even rethink how they want to define success is liberating for a number of folks. So I would start there. I do think one of the lessons that I have learned and am continuing to learn and try to lean into is what it looks like to be an enabler versus a manager. And I see, and I say to folks on my teams, like, my job is to be an enabler, and that means to set them up for success, right? It means making sure that everybody has the resources that they need to do their jobs well, that they have barriers removed that are inhibiting them from doing their jobs well, and they have the freedom to create and dream. So that's a lesson that I encourage other folks to think about from where you sit. What does it look like to actually be a greater enabler for the success of the people around you versus managing their success, which might seem like a subtle difference, but I think it's actually pretty profound, to reframe the work in that way. Another one is really encouraging and supporting folks in understanding that they don't have to do this work alone, that, you know, real breakthrough and transformation is generally through community, whatever that definition of community is. That could be small, close-knit, like, community that is through mentorship or sponsorship or those sorts of things. That could be broader affinity-based community, but whatever it is, folks generally, and you know, this depends on personality and learning types and all those sorts of things, but the thing that we can do is help people not feel alone in the journey. And then finally, I think I talk often about, in my work with leaders, and this is both through Surge, but also I do a lot of formal coaching and things like that. I often say to folks, like, I don't want to just be a safety net. I actually want to create spaces for trampolines. And what I mean by that is, like, if there are inevitable failures or you know, I don't even like to think about them as failures, but if it is inevitable that we're going to stumble. I don't actually just want to provide a net for people. I actually want to provide that trampoline that allows you to bounce back and even higher. And I think that it's important that people feel that from you, and know that it, one, gives them that freedom to know that failure isn't fatal, but also it lets them know that they're not in it alone, and that when they do have those inevitable sort of missteps, that you're going to be there to help them reach even higher heights. So those would be some things that I would share.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, all of what you shared was interesting to me, but the trampoline concept, I've never really thought about it that way, from like, hey, you want to be there to support people and be their safety net, but it can actually help you accelerate. We can flip this around and turn you into, turn the situation and help you into a much better spot afterwards, right? Whatever that bump is. So thank you for sharing that. I do want to ask a little bit and kind of transition to, so we actually do have some time at the end for some questions from the group, if there are any. Maybe we can spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about kind of why is all of this important, particularly now. I think you've really touched on a lot of concepts here that really highlight why all of this is important all the time. However, you know, right now we're dealing with, you know, war. We're dealing with a racial reckoning. We're dealing with, you know, great resignation, some are calling it. So that it feels like, and maybe this is just normal now. This is the normal state that we are all operating in, and we should expect more of it, but it doesn't feel normal. How would you overlay kind of what's going on in the world and why this is all of these concepts around Ikigai and all of what we're talking about today is super important now. And would you offer any advice in the context of today's current environment? And what would that be?
Oh goodness, this is deep because
It's
it's
a heavy
not
one, right?
normal. Like there is, but here's the thing. So I want to just offer a few things. I just recently read this article. This came out of Accenture, and I love this reframing. They reframed this idea of the Great Resignation, and said like, what if we thought about it not as the Great Resignation, but the Great Reassessment, right? And the reason that I share that is because it's so aligned with what we're talking about today, right? It's like in this moment, in moments of crisis and turmoil and everything that we're living through, it is inevitable that folks will start to reassess their purpose, their place in the world, how they want to spend their time, like all those things. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that that reassessment is happening and not have people feel that they have to do that in the shadows, right? So an example of something that I've done, and some people may think this is a little out there, but I shared with my entire staff. I sent an email and I sent it to my board, and my board chair was surprised, a little shocked. But through this message, I said ultimately that I wanted Surge to be a place where people choose to be. And what I mean by that is, and I said is like, I want folks to thrive in our organization. And I recognize that lots of things are shifting. The ground is shifting underneath our feet in lots of ways. You've got folks who are caretaking for not only, children, but, elders in their homes. You've got a housing crisis that is leaving people with lots of housing instability. You've never mind the global pandemic and all, like a lot is happening. So my point in sending this message was to say, I want Surge to be a place where you can do your best work, where you can do work that brings you joy, that brings you fulfillment, that provides what you need for your family. And if that is no longer the case, I also want you to feel comfortable and not feel any shame or disloyalty or any of that for reassessing if this is the place that you want to be. And I thought it was important to do that, Nick, for all the reasons that you just laid out, right? Like, it's like, it is important for folks to understand that they do have the space to reassess, particularly in light of everything that's happening in the world, and make changes that are best for them. Now, I was very hopeful that that wouldn't lead to a whole round of, people deciding to leave the organization, and knock on wood, it has not. But I do think it's important for people to acknowledge what people are really going through right now. And it's why I thought that this concept and talk about Ikigai, this just feels so important to be thinking about in this moment, because there is this great reassessment that people are making of their lives and their being, and we can be a conduit and support folks in that journey without the fear that that's going to, cause great detriment to our institutions and organizations. Because I frankly believe that people living their best lives, and this may sound really hokey and corny, but if people need to leave my organization to do that, I believe that it is all going to be good. Like, I think that that is going to be great for them, but it's also going to be great for our organization, because it will create space for folks for whom the work will be what they need it to be. So that's what I would share with folks, is just recognize that these times, I don't even know what normal means. I think we have to be conscious of the fact that folks are living through things that we could not even imagine. I'll just share personally, we just had someone, a young person in my family who is away at college, attempt suicide. And there is just a rising, I mean, the rates of suicide in not just this country, but across the globe, with folks 14 to 21 are just astronomical right now. And I shared that with some folks on my team in a way that, you know, other people may think that that's about being vulnerable, but the truth of the matter is, I can't actually do my best work if I'm not letting people know, like, this is the reality that I'm dealing with right now and we're dealing with in our family. And therefore, I need some grace, I need some space, I need some understanding. So I'm sharing that just as an example of, like, real life is happening to people. And the more we can do to encourage people to not live these sort of segmented, compartmentalized lives that don't allow them to do their best work and be at their best, I think the more we can sort of catalyze people leaning into purpose, and our institutions being places that people feel allow them to do that.
Yeah, I love this concept of, hey, bring it out of the shadows. Like you said, let's acknowledge that it's going to be happening. People are having these thoughts. People are, to what extent, you know, and how much they're thinking about it varies, of course, but, like, let's not make it a big secret. Let's just talk about it, and it's okay. And inviting people to have that conversation. And, you know, I had this, your anecdote about your extended family kind of made me think about some of my reactions in supporting current team members who are in Ukraine, and kind of the experience. And I've been so impressed at the way that my current company has been supporting our Ukraine team members. But this concept of, like, one day, what you're worried about is maybe titles, promotions, what all of those external factors that you talked about at the beginning, Carmita, that in one day after the war starts, all of that goes out the window. And what you're worried about is food, shelter, water, safety, and how quickly those external motivators go away when in times of urgent and perilous times. So I think acknowledging, like you said, acknowledging that it's okay to feel that way, to talk about it, and that actually impacts how people show up every day. And if you really care about the best for your people, why wouldn't you acknowledge that, right? So very powerful thoughts that you're sharing. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what would it look like? And I ask these questions and I challenge myself in these ways, like, what would it look like for us not to have to wait for war, not to have to wait for a pandemic, not to have to wait for these, you know, in order to actually, like, center people's humanity. You know, there are ways in which I can look back and sort of say, like, oh, I think I got this part of that right, but I got this part really wrong, right? You know, and you can continuously improve and all of that. I think that times like these are moments for introspection and reflection, and to think about, how do we not just react in these moments, but how do we take the lessons that we learn from these moments and just instill them in the way that we see and treat our people always. We recently, before the pandemic at Surge, we were already a very flexible organization. Frankly, any organization I run is always going to be flexible because I don't like policing adults. I just don't believe in it. So we have unlimited vacation for that reason. Like, I don't like policing people's time. So we had a pretty flexible environment, but then, you know, the pandemic happens, and we all go into lockdown, and it changes life for everyone. Well, one of the things that was resulted from that, we've always had a very flexible work from wherever you want sort of space. But we realized we actually don't need any offices. Like, people didn't really actually want to come to an office. And that was, I will admit, Nick, and to everyone, it was horrifying to me because I am an off the charts extrovert. I want to see people. I actually want to be in community with people. Working from home is not my cup of tea. But when the majority of my team, we surveyed and folks said, like, given the choice, they're okay going into an office, but they would prefer not to. So we went from a space where it was like, you can work anywhere you want, to just saying like, okay, we're an all virtual organization. And you know what? People decided to move, there were people that were like, oh, like, I don't have to go somewhere. So instead of living in Oakland, I'm going to move and be with my family in Long Beach, or I'm going to move. And that was it just opened my eyes to the fact that people had needs that they didn't even know they didn't even know to express until it was made available to them, right? So to have someone on my team who said, like, my life has changed now that I actually can go and live with my sister and know that I can still do my work. And I didn't ever imagine that that was a possibility. So anyhow, a little off topic, but coming back to this whole notion of like, what are we learning in these moments that'll just make us better prepared to center our people, their well-being, always is just an ongoing sort of question and reflection for me.
Totally. And what an opportunity to unlock those opportunities versus that may have been there all along, just weren't at the surface, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, and I know we're coming up towards the end of our time here, and I'd invite anyone to ask any questions or reflections, share any reflections that you found that are surfacing for you or that you found particularly useful. I'd invite the whole group to share any of those in the comments or raise your hand. Feel free to hop in. And also, Carmita wanted to give you the opportunity to share any final and parting thoughts, because we've talked about a lot of different concepts all in this thread of helping people thrive. But are there any parting thoughts before we turn it over to the group for questions that you'd like to leave us with?
I think people have probably heard enough from me, Nick. I will just this one thing that I will share, that I often share. Is going to be in one of these books that are floating around in my head that are going to get written someday. But when I think about, you asked an earlier question about that sort of moment, or like what was it that triggered this decision to go from what I consider, I talk about going from living in 2D to 3D is really what happened in my life when I realized, like, oh, okay, like I actually need to have an aligned life that is focused on walking and living in purpose. One of the big things that I didn't share that I often say is I learned to actually not allow my ego to take me to places that where my values would not sustain me. And there's a lot in that. But for me, the ego part of it was actually huge, because when I sat back and reflected on, why I accepted the job as CEO, why, all these other sorts of things, I realized there was a lot of like pride and ego tied up in a number of things that I had done professionally that actually were not aligned with the things that are most intrinsically like my values. So if I could just leave with one parting thought, it is this notion of really tapping into one's core values, and leading from that place, and not allowing ego and lots of other things to supersede or lead you astray.
Awesome, thank you. And are there any questions or reflections, reactions from the group before we close out the session today? I do see a lot of comments, Carmita, in the chat. Thank you. I'll share your message in the Surge Institute. Your story is very inspiring. So inspiring. Love that. Love your reflections. That ego reflections. Thanks, Carmita. So lots of comments in that realm in the chat.
Thanks. And it looks like Michael has his hand up.
Oh yeah, nice.
Awesome.
It's one of the things that has dawned on me as a result of this session as far as Ikigai is concerned, which is a relatively new concept I was introduced to by a colleague. And the diagram just makes sense. But one of the things that I realize that's dawned on me is that it's a way of kind of like the artificial separation between what we do in our work and our professional life and our actual life. It sort of segues between the two. You can flow from the one to the other, so it somehow transcends both in terms of giving purpose and directionality. That's my takeaway from this.
I love that, Michael. I mean, and you're right. There is this artificial separation, right? Or this sort of compartmentalization of like, here's my way of being in work and here's my way. And the truth of the matter is we're all just one whole being, right? Like we are. And I think that the more we can align our life's work with that thing that is that purpose. And again, recognizing that purpose shifts over time. I just, and again, I often say my opinion is not necessarily the truth, but my opinion is that that a focus on trying to align one's life and one's work with one's purpose just leads to a much more fulfilled and thriving existence, is my opinion. And I think these ideas of compartmentalizing and separation lead to compartmentalized ways of being that don't allow, at least for me, in my experience, me to feel like I'm really thriving. It can feel like a lot of acting.
Interesting. Final point.
Thank you for sharing. Any final questions or comments? Excellent session. Thanks to all. More of a Marvel maniac. Thanks, Bob. I do have a decent collection.
Bob, you're right. There are some good Marvel storylines. I'll give you that. Yeah, but no, I really appreciate being able to be here. I appreciate you, Nick. Thank you, Joe, Julie, and it's Victoria, yeah, who's powering everything. I think this community is doing such powerful work. The fact that a community is built to support those who are developing and supporting others is really awesome. And if there are any ways that I can support the community or help as we are all on this journey and this evolution towards living aligned lives that allow us to thrive, I'm here to be in service of the community in any way I can be.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Carmita. And thank you, all of you, for joining today and taking the time to really focus on yourselves. And hopefully you took away, I know I personally, even though I've prepared with Carmita, I personally took away several nuggets for myself and jotted them down. So thank you for the opportunity to do that. And thanks to the IESE Business School for hosting, allowing us to host on their platform today. So many thanks and best of Wednesday. Today's Wednesday. Best of Wednesday to everyone. Have a nice rest of your day.
All right. Take care.
Bye all.